Chelsea.
Hey everybody.
And today we have a special guest with us, Mr. Jay Williams.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Who is the state coordinator with Alabama Counts. And Jay is doing some very important work here in Alabama. He is making sure that we all get counted for the U.S. Census 2020, which is on April 1st. Is that right?
That is Census Day. April
Okay.
1st is Census Day, but the actual online self-response option starts March 12th.
Excellent, excellent. So before we get started talking about why the census is important, tell us a little bit about yourself, Jay.
Oh, so my name is Jay Williams. I am a social worker by trade. I got my master's from the University of Alabama. I'm born and bred in Alabama, so I like to say that this is home. And I care about marginalized folks. I care about the historically underrepresented, so that's kind of why I'm doing this.
Definitely. What part of Alabama are you from?
I grew up in Birmingham.
Excellent, excellent. And so you're the state coordinator with Alabama Counts. How did you come into that position?
Well, just like any fresh out of the college student, I was applying to jobs, and this one really stuck out. It was on the Alabama Nonprofit Job Board, and which I just find as a wonderful resource for anyone that's trying to get into nonprofit work that isn't, traditional social work. And I got lucky. They boiled it down to 2 candidates, and I had to go through rounds of interviews. And by the time I had finished and graduated, I had my final interview, and then I heard back a few weeks later that I'd gotten the gig.
Awesome. Awesome. And so, as a social worker, a lot of times you're working with marginalized communities that are underserved, right? And a lot of that is because they're just not counted, they're on the margins and their interests aren't taken into account. So it makes sense that you're into this position. Tell us about your nonprofit, Alabama Counts, and how it's working with the Census Bureau.
So we're not technically a nonprofit, but we are a collaborative of nonprofits.
Okay.
We don't have the 501c3 certification, but all the partners do. And so I guess in 2018, HICA, the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama, were approached by national funders and folks that were really concerned about Alabama and how Alabama is progressing. And so they got together and they built a team of really important stakeholders that serve the marginalized community. So HICA, Greater Birmingham Ministries, the Alabama Coalition for Immigrant Justice, who are both if you're working in the marginalized nonprofit community sector, you know these 2 entities because they've been doing this since HB 56, and GBM has a 50-year history. And so they also looped in Voices for Alabama's Children, who is a large voice for underserved children in the communities in Alabama. And then they also looped in the Blackbelt Community Foundation, which serves traditionally a 12-county range across the state. And for this particular project, they're serving 14 counties.
Right. Cool. And so I think I missed the actual name of the collaborative is Alabama Hard to Count Collaborative. That's right. And then your motto
is Alabama Counts.
That's right. Yeah.
That was like in collaboration with the state and nonprofits and philanthropy. They came up with it, and even Big Communications, who's got the communications contract for the census campaign in Alabama. So #Alabama Counts just came out of that.
Excellent, excellent. And so tell us what the census is. Like, what is the purpose of the census?
The census is simply put, it's a count of every single person living and breathing on April 1st in the United States. A lot of folks think that it's for citizens or residents. It's not. It's for everybody. And the intended purpose behind that is to inform funding, representation, and the overall count of anybody living in the United States.
Excellent.
Which is actually constitutionally mandated.
That's a good point. I think we forget about that sometimes. So this is how many censuses have we had before this?
So it started in 1790.
Okay.
And it has occurred in a 10-year sequence, so it happens every 10 years, and you have to live with that data for a decade. And so we haven't missed a census. So it's occurred since 1790, and it's coming up again now.
Right. So you do the math, right?
Yeah, y'all can figure that out. I'm a people person. I'm not a math person.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the things we forget, that it is in the Constitution. It must happen.
Mm-hmm.
So 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, we're going to have a census.
It's going to happen again.
So I think a lot of times people think about the census and they think, oh, this is just data, this is reports. But I want to talk about, why this is important from a congressional seat standpoint, why that's important for our community from a funding standpoint. But what do you have to say about either of those?
So from a congressional standpoint, I mean, we're talking about your population reflecting the number of congressional representatives that your state gets. So after the census, they do the reapportionment and the redistricting. And so during the reapportionment period, we're determining based off of population count how many representatives and electoral votes, because those two numbers are tied, how many representatives you get for your state. And that's also in comparison to other states. So states that have, rapid growth, they're going to need representatives based off of the math problem that they use to determine that representative of their population count.
Right.
And so maybe because Alabama might be slow in their growth and, say, Georgia might be more rapid, we might need to trade congressional seats. And Alabama in particular is at risk of losing 2 seats. And so for that, we have to, because of that risk and because that would diminish our voice, we have to have as accurate a count as possible.
Right. And then we think about the funding. A lot of the funding that we get at a state level and down to our counties are based on census numbers.
Yep.
So, but that's funding for schools, hospitals, senior programs, roads and bridges, and I don't think the average person is thinking.
Not at all. People talk about voting a lot, and obviously we just finished a primary, and voting is extraordinarily important, and it impacts your life directly. But so does data. Census is how choices are made, and where we decide to allocate funding based off of need, because it is reflected in the data.
Definitely. So we have limited resources. We understand that in terms of the money, the federal funds that we have, for all different types of projects, the number of seats that we have in the House of Representatives as well. And so the census data is specifically going to be used to dictate how those resources are distributed, right? And so you make a compelling case about why you should be counted, but what if you have some type of risk factor? Like, what if you may have a warrant, or what if you don't have proper status to be here in the United States legally? Can you still participate in a census?
You certainly can, and we thoroughly encourage it, because if you fall into that category and that demographic, you are already at risk for so many different things that hold you back from getting to where you want to be. And if you're not counted, that's just adding on another barrier to your individual success.
Right. So what type of assurances can we give to the viewers out here to say, look, okay, you can trust this individual who's working for the federal government apparently. I know there's several ways that you can be counted. We're going to get into that. But what type of assurances can you give people to make them feel more comfortable in the situation?
Title 13 in the United States Constitution specifically states that the Census Bureau cannot share census data with any other individual, body, government body, or entity, like business entity, outside of the Census Bureau. And if an individual that is employed by the Census Bureau provides census data to another person, entity like Department of Homeland Security, for instance, or ICE, or your PO, your parole officer, that person will then be subjected to a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. And I don't know a single Census Bureau employee that makes over $250,000.
Right, seriously.
And I know, I think I heard that the Trump administration wanted to add the question about the citizenship status, and that the Supreme Court struck that down. Is that still?
Yeah, that's
important.
That's still in play. The citizenship question is not included on the 2020 census. They tried to make an argument in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found that argument did not suffice, and ultimately the citizenship question on the 2020 census was removed. That does not mean that the citizenship question is unconstitutional. It has been on there before. And so potentially it could be on the 2030 census. So we have to do advocacy around that to ensure that the count is not diluted.
Right, because we have to kind of weigh the cost in that, the type of a chilling effect that can have on the number of individuals that would participate in the census. And, I would say this, I want to definitely, give a salute to the Supreme Court on this particular issue, because the arguments that were presented by Trump's attorneys, basically, the Supreme Court saw right through them and looked to the context in which Trump had been elected and some of the rhetoric he uses every single day, and in particular when he's campaigning, and said that, those arguments that his attorneys put forth really weren't consistent with how he had been messaging on his campaign and how he governed as president as well.
That's exactly right. I can't think of the specific arguments they tried to play out, but when you looked at what they were trying to do and what they were saying they were trying to do it for and how their actions, represented that, it just seemed like they were trying to pull a fast one.
It's like, we're not buying it, basically.
No,
That's what this
not at all.
Said, All right, Jay, so we have technology, we have access to the internet. I know that typically, it was only door-to-door was the only way to be counted, but now there's multiple ways that one can be counted and make sure that they're not left out on this process. So tell us about those options.
So you made a point, and I want to just kind of elaborate on it. You said that we have the internet and we have access to it.
Right.
We live in Birmingham.
Right.
And we know that internet access is a lot more available here. I have Carlos Aleman, who is the deputy director for HICA. He came up to me one day, he said, Jay, I often tell people I live in Birmingham, but I rarely visit Alabama. And so what that speaks to is the fact that what we have in Birmingham is not
the norm.
It's not the norm for Alabama. Right. I mean, we live in a 90% rural state, and so internet access isn't widespread, So, yes, you can apply. You can fill out your census online, and you can do it at my2020census.gov starting March 12th. And I encourage you can do it on your phone, you can do it on a tablet, you can do it on your laptop. And I encourage anybody that has access to these resources to do so. But you can also do it by phone, so you can call, and in that way you're able to have additional language access that you may not have on the online option. From the online option, you can get 12 to 13 languages to respond in. From the phone option, I believe it's up to 50.
Okay.
And then, you can do it in the traditional way, which they're trying to minimize the traditional way as much as possible through the traditional form that you mail back. And you'll have that in 2 languages, English and Spanish.
Okay, so we have snail mail, the traditional way of doing it. You can use your phone, internet, desktop, laptop.
Yep.
And also you can participate by phone.
Yeah, you can call in.
Okay, and then in some instances, are individuals actually going door to door and going into these areas where maybe considered off the grid or something like that?
Yeah, ultimately, yeah. So the internet the self-response option starts March 12th. And it will go through the start of May.
Okay.
And then from May to July is the follow-up enumeration. And that's when you get people knocking on doors and asking people nice and politely, will you complete your census form? Can I help you complete your census form? Just that campaign happens, which is kind of what we're trying to avoid because we know we live in Alabama. And for XYZ reason, you don't want someone knocking on your door asking you for your information.
True. And I mean, some of these areas, like one of the coalition members that you're working with is a nonprofit that's particularly the Blackbelt Community Foundation. Some of the folks that are living in these areas, who is actually going to be able to get to some of these houses or to some of these smaller neighborhoods can be very difficult as well.
It can. Yeah. And that's why we're encouraging as many community members as possible to apply for these jobs. First of all, they're well paid. They're flexible. And so we're trying to, and Alabama's actually done pretty well on the hiring. There's a website that I use to track the hiring rate in Alabama, and I mean we're doing pretty solid. There was a lull at one point, and then we sent out some advocacy through the different avenues that we have, and we're like, hey, recruit people. We need to amp this up. And, you know, it really turned around a lot.
Cool. So these jobs are specifically for people that do door-to-door canvassing and go and ask folks, hey, look, you lived here, you file your taxes at this address, but you haven't been counted yet.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Right.
And we'll know where to go for the follow-up response once the individual self-response option is done. Well, it's not going to be done because you can do it through July, which is great because, you know, obvious for that obvious reason. But we'll know where we can go to where the low responses are because of the online self-response option.
Right.
Because that data will coming pretty quickly. And the Census Bureau has agreed to put out weekly notices of where the low response scores are so we can deploy the troops and target.
Excellent.
So it's my2020.gov.
My2020 Census.
Census.gov. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to put that in our comments. So
yes.
Yeah, like it goes live next week, March 12th.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's close.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's great that we have this extended period to be counted. It kind of just makes me think more about how we should have that type of concept applied to voting. You know, rather than trying to have everybody rush to the polls in a 12-hour period.
Yeah.
You have work going on. You still got all of your other daily responsibilities. It's not like it's a national holiday or statewide holiday or whatever the case may be. You know, and so you have several months to ensure that everybody's included in this census process, which is that's a good thing, definitely.
I mean, I'll give the Census Bureau credit where credit is due. They are doing everything that they can from where they are to ensure a complete count. And I mean, despite lacking funding, because that's why we've moved to the online option, they decided they couldn't fund it as much as they wanted to. And so they decided to do that, to do what they could with what they have. And as a social worker, I really understand that. I mean, we do as much as we can with less.
Right. And so, if someone comes to your house and say you haven't, had an opportunity to use your phone or your laptop, whatever the case may be, and you have several people who live in your home, but you're the only one home in that situation, are you able to provide the information for your household, or is it just you respond on an individual basis?
You respond for your household.
Okay.
And if the demographic data is very minimal, I mean, they're asking for your age, they're asking for your race, your ethnicity, which we can discuss how those are different. They're asking for your relationship with the householder, and they're asking for the household telephone number, essentially, just in case they need to follow up with you because maybe there's some questions about your form.
Right. Or maybe you've been counted 5 times already.
And you're like, and they're like,
who's
why?
the real Jay Williams? Like, who's the real Jay Williams?
And here's the thing. Keep in mind, like with the Hispanic and Latino community, you have a lot of double names.
Definitely, yeah.
And so, like, there could be some confusion about who is who on the form, and maybe a child is split between 2 homes because of their parents living apart from each other.
Right.
And, they were counted here, and they might have a double name here, and they might not have a double name there. And there's some kind of confusion, so they might need to call you to determine what this person's actual name is, or who do they live with.
Right. So you mentioned race and ethnicity. Talk a little bit about the difference in the two.
I mean, so let's see. We have, I think, 3 defined ethnicities, or is it the other way around? Black, white, and Hispanic.
Right.
Or non-Hispanic white. So that's your race.
Right.
And then so we have 4 defined races essentially, and then we can boil that down to your ethnicity, so your country of origin, and that's within the Latino community. That's a big issue because not everyone's from, first of all, Central America or South America.
Right.
And then not everyone is from a country within those respective continents.
Exactly.
And we need to be able to identify the needs of an ethnicity separate from their race.
Exactly. And as a social worker, I know that you can appreciate the value in the individual being able to define themselves. And, members of the African American or Black community have essentially accepted a title that's been placed upon them without really having sometimes the knowledge to know the ethnic background,
True.
The place of origin.
Very true.
Or just have accepted as a general title, whereas I think we have such a strong influx of immigration from quote unquote Hispanic and Latino areas, that culture attached to that ethnic background is still very strong, and there's a lot of pride around it.
Oh boy!
And so I've had this conversation with many people, and they reject that title, in terms of just being blanketly labeled Hispanic or Latino without actually knowing like what culture or country.
It's a constant debate. I mean, you go from, and I know this because I'm based out of HICA and I have these conversations.
Right.
You're talking about like the Hispanic identifier. That's someone from Spain.
Right.
And then you're talking about like the Latino, and then you're talking about like folks that come from South America essentially. But then you get into Latino, Latina, Latinx, because Latinx, I mean, you're trying to be inclusive as much as possible there, because that brings gender into it, right? And so that's a whole it's a whole topic of conversation. So I think we definitely need to be mindful of how data is reflective of the community.
Certainly. Yeah. And I mean, we're asking folks to participate in this process, so I think that you want to definitely be respectful of, calling you by the name that you present yourself as, how you would like to be identified. So that's something that we should probably be working on for the 2030 census, because I know there's a lot of work that goes into that. Without
a doubt. I mean, we've got so many different identifiers now that, we need to be mindful of the needs of those community members. And I've been talking a lot about the Latinx and Hispanic community, but you're also talking about your NHAAPI community. So your Native Hawaiian, your Asian American, your Pacific Islander community, because not every person that looks like they're from the east of the world is from China or Japan. And there's a whole movement called Right in Taiwanese, because Taiwan is considered separate from China. And a lot of people don't really make that distinction. And so the movement to write in your specific ethnicity is strong. Yeah, it's real strong.
Definitely. And I say if it encourages more people to participate and take pride in this process, then we should definitely fall on the side of being more inclusive rather than just looking for efficiency. And I understand that that's an argument that needs to be given consideration too.
People got to pay for it. You got to pay for it.
Right.
But I don't think having an additional identifying question that's that important needs to be understated and underfunded.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with you on that.
So, are there any, I think citizens would be thinking about people in their neighborhoods that are around them, but are there typically any undercounted subsets of our community that we need to be thinking about when it comes to census?
So you wouldn't know it, but children 0 to 5 are the most undercounted group, and that spans across demographics. It's one of the biggest pieces of data that we have out there, that in the 2010 census, we missed over 1 million children. You wouldn't think so.
Why do you think that is?
So many reasons.
Okay.
And it's really, it boils down to the fact that, children are split between homes. Okay. A lot of the time, children are in foster care. So a foster home might not think to count them because they think, I only need to count my blood relative. Another one might be that a child is in a human trafficking situation, which I know is terrible to mention, but it's a huge reality, right? Especially in our country. And you really name it, like, say a child is, so April 1st is the snapshot, right? Say a child is born March 29th, right? You're born on that day. I don't know how, I don't have a kid, but I don't know a mother or a family that is concerned with doing their civic duty with a newborn. There's so many things to take care of in that. And so, like, we talk about, like, these terrible situations or a child split between homes, but, you might be celebrating a new birth and you're not really particularly concerned about that child being counted on your census form, or really, for that matter, you filling out your census form. But keeping in mind, the next 10 years of their life is impacted by that census data. And that's easily the most important developmental period for a child. And so ensuring that they have food, shelter, and a peaceful place to develop, that's impacted by the census.
Certainly.
And so ensuring that they're counted is just as vital.
Yeah, it sounds like we got to send some of these workers out to the hospitals.
Yeah. Right in the maternity ward. It's like, hey guys, I got a form for you. Just do it real quick. I mean, they're already filling out 100 different forms in the meantime. Why not do one more?
That's right. They won't even notice.
What about our homeless population? Like, some of the struggles around that.
Oh. So, the Census Bureau has an enumeration process separate from the individual self-response and the follow-up enumeration. It's called group quarters enumeration.
Okay.
And they employ this operation in several settings. They do it for college campuses. They'll do it for retirement homes. They'll do it for prisons and jails, but they'll also do it for shelters. And so the step that we're taking is to work with, like in Birmingham, we're working with One Roof to ensure that as many people experiencing homelessness are in the shelter on April 1st as potentially possible. And so they'll do the group quarters enumeration that way. But additionally to that, Census Bureau will send, in collaboration with your shelter organization in your community, Census Bureau workers to locations where we know that there are high populations of people experiencing homelessness. Mm-hmm. So that be a park, a bridge, just your general, and the folks that work in this community know where people reside a majority of the time, and so they'll send individuals out to count them that way. And someone asked me the other day, if a homeless person goes to the library. A person experiencing homelessness goes to a library. We like to use person first language.
I like it.
Goes to a library. Can they do the self-response option? Mm-hmm. I'm yet to hear back from the Census Bureau whether or not that, because they're going to ask you for your address.
Right.
How do you respond to that question? Right. Which is, it's kind of problematic in itself. But if they can self-respond, we're encouraging that as well.
Right. All right, Jay. So you're doing a great job of kind of spreading the word about this. Do you have any other plans to do any type of media blast, or what's your strategy in terms of making sure that you leverage the media to get the word out about the census?
So on April 1st, there's going to be a huge media day in Montgomery because that's Census Day. It's a big rally in Montgomery. And then Alabama's disability counts, which is being driven through ADAP, is hosting several rallies throughout the state in Birmingham, Huntsville, Montgomery, and Mobile on April 1st to raise awareness of the census. And then, on March 11th, several folks will be posting on their social media about ways to get questions answered to respond to the census. If you have concerns, you can text 205-345-5505. You can text COUNT to that number and 345-5505, and then you'll be prompted with why the census is important and who can respond. Alabama, and how you can respond, and as well as why it's important to you. So you'll be prompted to say, why is the census, why does the census matter to me?
Right.
And so you can do that. Alabama Possible went above and beyond and bought this community motivator tool where folks can respond and find out about the census and all that stuff. And so we'll be posting on social media on March 11th about that. And I encourage anybody that wants to do that, contact me or contact Richard, and he can contact me.
Excellent. And so, in addition to individuals, taking on civic responsibility and responding and making sure that they're counted and making sure that their families are counted, people that live in their households, or if you know about a family member that's living in some obscure location, you can let somebody know so they can be counted. But organizations can be a part of this too, right? Like you're part of a coalition, and you're also accepting other organizations to reach out to you, and you can give them information on how to make sure the communities they serve are counted as well. Tell us about that.
So, if you serve an underserved population, if you serve a marginalized community in whatever capacity, you have these touch points with historically undercounted community members. And providing an internet access point for someone to complete their census is something that a lot of folks are doing. Hosting like a afternoon for census form completion. If you own a business, giving an extra 10-minute break in their day so they can complete their census form, they can do that. And then if you're really interested in going out in the community, please reach out to us because we're equipping people with the tools and the resources to do that. Mm-hmm. We are fortunate enough to have additional funding, and we want to encourage anybody that is wanting to work in the community to reach out to us and apply for this funding, because it's going through the Community Foundation of Greater Birmingham initially, but we're going to be expanding to the entire state of Alabama, because we know how important it is for folks to work in their community with their community to increase participation.
Excellent. And this website, boulderadvocacy.org, it's a good resource to get more information as well.
So Boulder Advocacy, they covered a story on us.
Okay.
And it was so great because they were like one of my first big wins. I was like, we're going to get national attention. This is a wonderful website. But I'd encourage everybody to go to, if you want resources, and specifically like state-based resources,
right.
I would encourage anybody to go to census.alabama.gov/resources. Big Communications has done a wonderful job of compiling social media posts, banners, logos, videos, door hangers, yard signs, all sorts of tools to raise awareness in your community. And then, if you want to raise awareness through tech and, have like an iPad, contact me, because I really want as many people doing this as they do for canvassing for voting. And I mean, I can't tell you how many text messages I got on the day before and the day of the primary. I want that for the census because it needs to be that way.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so here in Birmingham, I know this is, it's a 74% Black African American city. And so you mentioned the partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau and also some of the state, but in particular, are you doing any special efforts on behalf of cities like Birmingham and other underrepresented cities such as?
So Birmingham Montgomery, Huntsville, and Birmingham all have complete count committees, which are these entities that were designed by this model designed by the Census Bureau to bring multi-system partners together. Okay. And so the mayor's office and the city council are starting to work together to raise awareness in the community, and I will be working with them to do that. It's just we have to meet, and so we'll figure that out when it comes to it. Montgomery Counts is doing things in their community. They just hired a census coordinator, and she is wonderful, and she's doing a lot of great things. I can't speak to the specific dates at this time, but keep an eye out. Follow our social media because we'll be highlighting it. Our Instagram is at ALAHTC2020, and then our Facebook page is the Alabama Hard to Count Collaborative. And we're posting daily. We're posting about why it's important, what's going on, and there's also fun memes on there because we have fun with this. There's like one, for instance, is character from The Matrix saying, "What if I told you the census is more important than voting?" Because it might be for your community, because it's 10 years that you have to live with this data versus 2 years living with a representative or 4 years living with a representative. Census goes past any administration.
That's true. That's a good point. And so we're nearing the end of our interview. Before we go, I'd like to ask you, where did you pick up this jersey, man.
Man.
I know our viewers are going to want to know as well.
Man,
I have such a good sense of taste. If I want to know, they want to know.
I
So
appreciate
I'm just
that.
going to go and ask.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I work with HICA, and I placed a donation.
Okay.
And I was like, hey, I mean, I got this a lot of the time because
Listen, this for me. I just gave you some money.
because I worked for them. I work for them and I work with them. And I was like, hey guys, how do I get this jersey?
Right.
And they were like, place a donation. So I placed a donation, and they were kind enough to reward me with it. HICA partners with the Barons every year to do their Los Barons game and to raise awareness and to get to fundraise and stuff like that. And so the players wear these jerseys. And they had leftover jerseys from, this is probably like 8 years old apparently.
Retro. I like
Yeah,
that.
and so I was like, let's see what I can do to get this jersey. And they were kind enough to really give it out.
That's cool. That's cool. Eva, did you have any?
No.
All right. Well, Jay, this has been a great interview. You know, we got to have you back.
Please.
Before the census season is over.
Okay.
And if there's any closing thoughts or information you want to leave with our listeners, go ahead.
One, follow our social media at ALA HTC 2020 on Instagram. Two, and more importantly, on March 12th, complete your census form online at my2020census.gov.
Excellent. Well, this is a conclusion of another episode of Communal Expressions. I'm Richard Rice. This is Eva Melton. And thank you for joining us, Jay. You're doing great work.
Thank
we
you.
want to encourage you. If there's anything we can do to help you, let us know. You're welcome back here anytime.
I appreciate y'all.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.